Okay, so we are learning how to graph sine, the graph of y equals sine x. When we do this, it's going to be very important that we have all of this information we're going to talk about today memorized. So first, let's talk about what just the graph looks like itself. And this can come from the unit circle as we think about the values we have. But if I have y equals sine x, well, I'm always going to start at 0, because if I plug in 0 for x, I get 0. And then the graph is going to be split into 4 equal parts. And the way that I would recommend memorizing this is put your 4 tick marks there and then start at the end. And we know that 1 period is 2 pi. That's one time around the unit circle. And then we're going to split that in half to get this part. So if that's 2 pi, half of 2 pi is pi. And if I cut it in half again, half of pi is pi over 2. And then if I, to find this point is a little bit trickier. There's 2 ways to find this point. One is to think of it as 3/4 of 2 pi. Okay, and so let's off to the side. If I take 2 pi times 3/4, then that gives me 6 pi over 4, so I multiply straight across, and then reducing that gives me 3 pi over 2, and so that makes this tick mark 3 pi over 2. But it'll be very important to be able to find these 4 equal parts, and we'll do that every question, so get used to it. The other thing that we will have to find is this max and minimum. And so we'll just put that right here and here, and then we'll label it. For sine x, it will go up to 1, and it will go down to -1. And then every sine curve follows this same pattern. This pattern where it starts at the origin, it'll go up to whatever the maximum is, and then it'll go down back to what's called the midline, and then down to the minimum and back up. And so this is what the graph of sine x looks like. And it will continue on forever, but we're just going to graph what we call 1 period. Okay, so we've been using this word a little bit. Let's write down what it means. So we have a period of sine, and the period is just the distance it takes for the function to repeat. Actually, we'll say to complete 1 cycle. So, and we'll use p. The period for sine is 2 pi. Because it starts here at the origin, kind of the middle of the graph, and it goes up, back down, and then back up again, and that took a distance of 2 pi. And that's very important. You need to have that memorized. The amplitude is, we're going to define it as half of the total height. It is not the maximum, although for a little while it'll look like the maximum. And actually, until we start shifting these, it'll look like the maximum, but it's not the maximum. So the amplitude, if you look at this curve, you would say the amplitude, looking at from here to here, this is a distance of 2, 1, 2, and half of that is 1. And so the amplitude, which we'll use A, actually I'll just write out amp, is 1 for sine. Okay, and then we'll talk about domain and range. Domain, this curve goes forever. It never stops repeating. And so the domain, it goes forever to the left and forever to the right. So the domain is all real numbers, or negative infinity to infinity. And the range, this curve, the lowest it goes is -1, and the highest it goes is 1. And so the range is everything between -1 and 1. So before you move on, take some time to make sure you can graph y equals sine x, because we're going to transform this next, and you have to have this graph memorized in order to transform things.